All right, good afternoon, good morning everyone, and welcome to this presentation to help prepare you for the National Leaders Conference. This is Kelly. Glad to meet those of you who are new and will be coming to NLC for the first time this year, and also welcome back to our veteran advocates. Looking forward to seeing you. So we have the next hour planned for this presentation, and we have a couple extra things that we're going to cover today based on that quick poll that we did with all of you last night. And it looks like some folks would appreciate an opportunity to dig in just a little bit to the new law, which is really the big talk of the town, I know, here in Washington and also out in the states and across districts. So in order to prepare you to benefit at the greatest level possible for the exciting program that we have in store for you over the next week, or coming up in the next week, we want to make sure that you're fully prepared. So the purpose of this presentation is to talk a little bit about how you can prepare for your meetings, share with you a little bit about the conversations that have been going on here in Washington and also across the states. I've been out talking to principals and actually a few other state level officials and really hearing about the reaction and the impression going forward. And I have to tell you that for the first time in my experience with NAESP, I have never seen such tremendous support and political and practical will to address the needs of principals. So it's truly an exciting time. I think our time together at NLC will be an opportunity for you to have some of the most important conversations that you need to have going forward as we look towards ESSA implementation. So we'll talk about some top issues that are going on. I'll share with you a couple of talking points, and as I mentioned in the email, I'll be providing all of the background and talking points that you'll be using in your meetings on Capitol Hill by tomorrow afternoon. So let's get started. Go ahead and your honor. All right, so if you haven't, just a couple of nuts and bolts things. I've talked with a few attendees and helped them get situated and requesting your meetings. It's not too late. Members of Congress are used to getting short notice requests, and a week and a half in advance is by no means short notice on the Hill. If it's 24 hours or more, not that we're recommending this, but you should really get on top of scheduling your meetings, and if you need any help, please let me know. NAESP has a new action center that you can find at naesp.org. And go under Legislative Action Center, and you enter your zip code under Find Legislators, and that will help you access and identify your members of Congress and their contact information in order to send in a request. I've heard from a lot of folks who have been very successful in getting their meetings lined up, so thank you for sharing your schedules. Why is it important that you share your schedule? Well, it's because we want to know who you're meeting with on the Hill. If you have a meeting with a Senate or a House Education Committee member, either on the Authorizing Committee or the Appropriations Committee, we want to work with you and provide additional talking points and make sure that you're fully prepared to go in and have some important discussions with those folks, because they are in leadership positions and they have more of an ability to impact the direction of the laws and the legislation that's being considered right now with regard to the budget and otherwise. So go ahead. So just a real quick an overview of what's going on in this Congress. We're now in the second session of the 114th session. If you haven't been paying attention to the news on education policy, well, it's my pleasure to inform you that ESEA reauthorization is now finished. The Every Student Succeeds Act, sorry, there's a little typo there in the slide, that it really, the reason why the title is funny is because the initial bill that came forward was Every Child Achieves Act in the Senate version. The House version was Every Student Succeeds Act. So they've cleverly smushed the two different titles together to result in Every Student Succeeds Act. So commonly known as ESSA or ESSA, whichever you prefer. But really ESSA is prevailing as the dominant piece of conversation on Capitol Hill, and it's certainly, I would argue, neck and neck on budget issues in terms of priority. So while we have quite a bit to discuss related to ESSA, the fact of the matter is Congress has passed this law and reauthorized, the process has completed, so that means it does move into the regulatory arena. In light of the fact that the administration has a strong track record on regulation and ESEA issues, Congress is taking a much more heavier hand on oversight hearings. However, there are other legislative and authorizing issues that are still at hand, which Congress may or may not address this year, and that includes reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, career and technical education, and student data privacy. We're calling it FERPA, but not really FERPA. The fact of the matter is these issues have been, like ESEA, outstanding for a long time. They're bills that have been expired. So we do have some legislative initiatives around those three topic areas that we are going to share with you, and you'll be receiving background information on a couple of bills that we've had introduced to directly help continue the path to building the capacity of principals through these legislative vehicles. So here's the reality. It's an election year. The schedule is very tight. As I mentioned, the dominant conversation is ESSA, but also the budget. The new speaker in the session, as we had Speaker Boehner step down last year, we now have Speaker Paul Ryan. His big priority going into this year was to try and get Congress on a regular order in terms of consideration of the appropriations process, and that means the budget bills that encompass the federal budget overall. But that's not looking very likely. He's had a lot of issues with the Freedom Caucus and members of the various factions within the Republican caucus in general. So there's a big question mark as to whether or not Congress can actually get significant authorizing legislation done, as well as consideration of these appropriations measures that fund the government and the programs that, especially in education, that we really need. So as we're looking ahead, Congress will be consumed with ESSA implementation hearings. They'll be looking at the department and any regulatory rules, technical assistance, or guidance that they'll be issuing on the new law. And really all of this means that we're looking towards a transition period over the next year and into the administration. We covered a little bit of this just now, sharing again the perspective or the landscape on the Hill is that Republicans really want to balance the budget. They're back to cutting spending and reducing the size of the federal budget and footprint overall. The challenge is that 2 years ago we had a budget deal that really set forth the spending levels that the government could abide by or Congress could abide by, that put us more on a level playing field and got rid of those nasty little sequester cuts that were set to go into action and triggered, which was really a huge victory in making sure that we didn't have significant cuts to education funding and programs. However, it looks like this year that Republicans are walking away from that deal. So there's a lot of questions right now about whether or not we're going to be able to make it through the appropriations process with education funding keeping level where it is or cut. So with that, we are, however, in the first period where the appropriations process will fund the new programs under ESSA that will begin to take place in this budget cycle. And we're already seeing a couple of little complicating factors with the President's budget request. We'll dig into that a little bit more. So here we are. We have this new law, ESSA. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes. In the interest of time, I'm going to do a really fast review of the nuts and bolts of a couple areas of the law that are most important. But please keep in mind that you'll not only have this webinar archive with the audio emailed to you, you'll have a host of other materials, and certainly we'll be discussing ESSA in further detail when you come to Washington. So to begin, this is a great snapshot to give you a sense of ESEA as it was authorized under No Child Left Behind, and now as we have it under Every Student Succeeds Act. In general, it doesn't sound like ESSA is that much different because we have continued annual assessments, we have subgroup disaggregation and reporting, maintenance of effort, supplement not supplant, all of the Title I formula, that will remain the same, but a lot of the argument in that we are actually on the cusp of ushering in a new paradigm of federal education policy rests with this second column and the change in opportunity that we actually do have under ESSA. So as you'll see, the very first component is accountability. AYP, that has been dismantled. It is now an accountability system that will be in the purview of states and districts to reorganize and reset. There are a lot of requirements that were in NCLB that no longer exist. Some of those are related to the highly qualified teacher provisions. Those are now gone, as well as the state set-asides for SES. Those have been eliminated. Teacher evaluation as it was required under the waivers, which will be null and void come August 1st, 2016, which actually states operating under waivers are essentially frozen right now, but those teacher evaluation and principal evaluation requirements, for that matter, are no longer requirements. They're use of funds under the new law. The SIG grants, the School Improvement Grant Program that has really been a terribly misguided policy effort, has been eradicated. It's been redesigned as a school capacity and improvement program where states have the ability to increase their set-aside from 5 to 7% in order to help districts work with schools to develop support capacity and improvement plans that include needs assessment, alignment of resources, and really take into account the direction of an improvement plan based on local feedback. Other areas include a new Title I formula, which is shifting to be weighted more towards concentrations of poverty in order to identify high-need schools. There was an attempt to shift the Title I formula, which didn't go over as well. But in Title II, it will be phased in over a 4-year process. Now, ESSA is authorized for a 4-year period as opposed to a 7-year period in previous authorizations. 5 to 7 years was generally the amount of time. But it's really interesting now to see that this bill is only authorized for a 4-year period. There are just quickly some new parent engagement sections that are really good language about fostering connections between schools, communities, and parents and how to do that. There are some funds tied to those strategies for programs. New early childhood mention. This is huge. We're so excited about this. States and districts now have the option to, which they could under NCLB, but it was less explicit, now use their Title I dollars directly for preschool. There's a lot more networking and coordinating services in the new law that talks about how you need to have district support to help schools connect with their early childhood community and put in place the interventions that work best for those kids. And most importantly, we were able to secure in both Title I and Title II call out to the principal's role in pre-K3 alignment and have use of funds to support that role directly. So we couldn't be more excited. And lastly, as we move on and dig in just for a couple more minutes, we have some new definitions that are really interesting in this new law that for the first time we have a more clear and I think comprehensive way of helping states and districts understand what professional learning is. It's no longer, and this is statutory language, going to be the type of use of funds where you have discrete opportunities, the one-day workshop. It's really moving more towards capacity building and that sustained job-embedded professional development. And I can't tell you, just as the tenfold increase in the number of times we see the term principal appear in the new law, we see just as many times the use of the word collaboration, job embedded. It's really good stuff. So the big question is, after all of this, have we really fixed No Child Left Behind? And this will continue to be a big question going forward for two very important reasons. This is a slide that shows why. The shifts in accountability authority, permissive use of funds, definitions, and lack of clarity, the two reasons why we are still questioning as to whether or not we've changed or fixed NCLB is because, first, all of these new options are really, they're just that. They're options. They're permissive use of funds that states and districts are allowed to take. So we actually present the new law as an option for change and opportunity or challenge. The second reason why we're not sure we fixed NCLB is because of this new use of the term consultation. So, and I say this a little tongue-in-cheek, but not really. You can't legislate any more than we have at the federal level now about playing nice in the sandbox. One of the few requirements in this law, other than states having to, and districts having to draft new plans that have assurances about their new accountability systems and their capacity building systems and what they'll do, is they have to develop them in consultation with local stakeholders. There's actually an iteration in the law at the number of partners, stakeholders, and people who have to be at the table when these states and districts are making these decisions. And of course, principals are right up there. So if you look at this slide, it's a really good demonstration of the areas where states are going to be making decisions. And I'm calling these the big decision points where principals need to pay attention and then look to weigh in. So this is where ESSA poses an opportunity to usher in that new paradigm. New decision points for states on accountability systems, limitations on the Secretary of Education's authority to influence those decisions, multi-metric systems, this is the direction we're moving in, consultation required by states and districts to involve principals, new permissive use of funds, again, everything is an option or it could stay the same. It's the state and the district's purview. New definitions that define and really talk to more about how things can be done when a state or district takes advantage of a use of fund. And the other sort of area of the law that we're looking at and why we think this is going to be a protracted debate for a long time. There are a lot of terms in the new law that are undefined and lack clarity. In fact, they're so vague that we're seeing lots of letters asking the department for clarification, including NAESPs, and we'll talk more about them, but words like effective and experienced and well-rounded are completely undefined and up to the states. So this would be an interesting process. So all of this boils down to a couple of points that we're asking principals and other state leaders to carry forward on the Hill, especially as Congress is really focused on this oversight. You'll see these 3 points here, and again, as I mentioned, we need to hold states and districts accountable for developing these required plans and help them understand what meaningful consultation is. We need to make sure that states and districts take advantage of the opportunities ESSA affords to build a strong system of support for principals. It's an unprecedented level of use of funds. I was just quantifying the number of use of funds that we now have for principals, and in Title II alone, over 80% of the ability of the list of use of funds can be devoted to principal support and capacity building. So we really have a tremendous opportunity. And again, looking at how the law starts to prod states in moving towards a multi-metric system and whether or not they choose to and whether or not it will be effective depends on their ability to use growth models in a way that really reflects true student growth and also this new indicator of school quality, which I'll talk about in a second. So here's some basic numbers for Title I. Funding is not increased exponentially. It's just a small tiered approach to increasing the overall bucket. Not surprising given the current majority on Capitol Hill. Again, shift in authority for, of the ability for states to have a new reset, refocus, if they so choose to address new standards, differentiated accountability systems, school improvement, and of course all of this in light of the tremendous amount of limitations Congress placed on the Secretary. So just to dig in a little bit, we talked about annual assessments. We talked about grade span. Well, actually we didn't talk about. Grade span will remain as far as science assessments and subgroups as well. So the current classification of subgroups will not change across states. But one of the new permissive use for elementary and middle level, and this is explicit in the new accountability index states have to design, is a measure of student growth. This last bullet is really aimed at what we were talking about before and starting to think about, as you're hearing this, what principals want to weigh in on. So accountability, states have to determine this new index that I mentioned. Their long-term goals have to be based on academic achievement, graduation rates, and there's a new priority on that English language learner subgroup. So the new index on accountability that states need to develop must have these 4 indicators. As I mentioned, student growth, or another statewide indicator for elementary and middle school success, student success, graduation rates, and then progress of that ELL subgroup population, as well as a new measure of school quality. Now, of these 4 indicators, the first 3 have to have a greater weight than the measure of school quality. The measure of school quality can be such as measures such as school climate and safety surveys, access to AP work, student attendance rates, teacher attendance rates. So you can see this is opening up a lot of room for discussion, but really it is taking that first toe in the water to a multi-metric system. But here's the caution again where I get back to this, is it a challenge or an opportunity? States, many states have really been at changing and adjusting their accountability systems over the past year. We know a lot of state legislatures have passed new bills. All of this work really under the waiver plans and looking at new standards that are also coming out from the states. That work happened well before this bill was passed. So now states have the ability to take the option to address these issues again under ESSA, or they could leave it the same. So this is really, I think, going to be a long debate. So just moving along. Again, we'll talk more about this when you all are here, but really this is about we really want principals to think about the bigger picture and how they can find their voice as we're looking at all of the capacity building and planning that needs to go into these new state and local plans to implement ESSA. So this slide is meant to prod your thinking and again point out that we have some new state level authority. So when we were talking about states and their authority, please note that that includes the governors. For the first time in 20 years, we have the National Governors Association who have endorsed federal policy. I'm happy to report that we'll have 2 representatives from the National Governors Association joining us for this conference, so we have some exciting discussion that will take place. Title II, Title II, we're just so over the moon about where we ended up. Again, I noted the formula shift where we're using concentrations of poverty now. And again, Title II Part A funds supporting effective instruction. This is the area where we've had the most pain points with regard to supporting principals over the past 10 years. And again, what we found is that states and districts were doing a very poor job supporting principals and using the majority of the funds to support teachers because we think in part of the statutory construct. So now what we have, not only under the formula grants, a greater emphasis on principals and their retention and development, but states can take of their entire allotment of Part A, 3%, and use it to build strong principal pipelines. Now that 3% is reflective of the 10% that many of you came to Washington last year and asked your members of Congress for. So we asked for 10, but we got 3, but we'll take what we can get because you know what? 3 is better than 0. So now looking at the rest of Title II, there's approximately 21 use of funds. So there are 15 to 18 areas that specifically call out principals in supporting issues along the principal pipeline, such as recruitment, preparation, retention. You can see here that there really was a coordinated and comprehensive effort to address principals at an unprecedented level. So district activities tracking along with state, we saw an uptick in the use of funds. Again, a lot of the use of funds really meant to address what districts need to do to better support principals. We also are seeing a shift in the use of funds really start to get at some of those school conditions and those issues that you all have brought to light over the past several years, whether it's job-embedded professional learning, bullying, PBIS, mental health. There are several areas of the law, not just relegated to Title II, that will begin to address these issues. And again, early childhood pre-K-3 alignment was a big winner in Title II, so we're very pleased with how the language turned out. National activities, this is a separate section of the same part, and it really talks about a few more targeted strategies. Many of you might be familiar in your districts with TIF grants. Well, now it's the Teacher and School Leader Incentive Fund. So I'm not sure, they've been calling it TSLIF, but we'll see how that plays out. But you can see that there's a real focus and emphasis on including teachers as well as principals in those human capital management systems. We have some really important funds related to building state and local comprehensive systems for professional learning to address literacy instruction. And this specific section is important because it begins at birth. And that's a real shift in the disposition of ESEA to begin to address that early grade or those early years more head-on. So one of the most exciting areas of Title II that we're pleased to support is the re-envision of the school leadership program. Many of you who came to NLC last year took heart and advocated for the School Principal Recruitment and Training Act. Very happy to report it made it into the bill. We're now looking at that program as the School Leader Recruitment and Support Program. And it's a re-envision of the program to be a lot more comprehensive in nature, and it's still the only program in the entire bill that only focuses on principals. So it will continue to be a priority. We like to say it's small but mighty, and we're also pleased to say that it keeps it's having a yearly presence or an annual presence on the congressional priorities. So it will continue, and we're going to be pleased to support that again. So I mentioned those definitions in ESSA that will be really important to pay attention to. Here are a couple of the highlights. The school leader residency program, definition is listed in Title II. That's a first ever in federal law. We've never seen a piece of legislation, including the Higher Education Act, address this issue head on. And it's a really important marker and indicator of what high quality principal preparation entails. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about this definition and how it relates to some of the priorities in the Higher Education Act going forward. School leader, many of you came last year and talked with your members of Congress about that definition and the specific verbiage that we needed included in the law. I'm happy to report that Congress took our definition almost verbatim. So we are really, really excited that school leader retains or will mean that all programs in ESEA or ESSA now need to align outcomes to benefit the school leader, who must be the principal, assistant principal, or other person designated the responsible party for instructional leadership inside the school building on a daily basis. So that's really important. Those words matter. It matters when it comes time for your district to interpret how they're going to allocate and implement funds that they receive under Title II. So that's an important flag and marker. Professional development, as I mentioned, it really takes a different tact. It's not just professional development anymore left to a district or a state's own interpretation necessarily. There are several guidelines that talk about professional development must be personalized. It must be job embedded, sustained, and ongoing. And this applies to both teachers and principals. And finally, evidence-based. This is going to be an interesting area where I personally believe we're going to have a lot of issues surface with the lack of state and local capacity to really have the kind of research and data that shows the interventions that are working at a scaled level. Many of you might be familiar with I-3 grants and the level of rigor that those grants and the evidence that is needed in order to secure and implement those types of grants. Well, they've taken those definitions of the term evidence-based and included them now in ESSA. And essentially what that means is any intervention or strategy that states and districts want to pursue according to the allowable use or permissive use of funds under the bill. So this applies to discretionary funds as well as formula grants, such as the school improvement funds, have to have a level of evidence that's consistent with really what's more rigorous than we've ever seen, where you have one or two experimental studies that show the outcomes of an intervention, where you're using interventions that may have had a randomized controlled trial. So these are new terms, and I think the Department of Education's What Works Clearinghouse is going to become ever more important. So just moving ahead, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about these issues. They may be raised in some really exciting conversations with state and local leaders we're going to be having at the conference. We'll have folks from the state chiefs, from the governors, and also from the district level who will come in and talk about all of these policy shifts and what they mean on the ground. So again, is ESSA an opportunity or a challenge? Again, we see it as an opportunity to really make a concerted effort across the states to implement statewide and district-aligned comprehensive systems of support for principals. That's an unprecedented opportunity that we now have. So back to the budget. When you guys go to the Hill, we'll be talking about some of the issues with the funding for Title I. Again, we have some listed, and these are bullets and talking points that you'll be receiving. So don't worry, this is a lot of information on one slide. We'll go through each program, and the point of all of this is these are all priorities. These programs fund all of the education programs that make their way to your school building and help you not only lead, support your teachers, but provide services for kids. So what I would encourage you to do as you're looking over this slide and looking at these programs, pick out the program in the area that you can start and begin to connect the dots to your own school context. So for example, we know how the challenges that many of you face in making sure you're able to address the needs for special ed kids. So maybe you want to talk about IDEA funding and what that means for you in your school. So begin to really digest some of these areas and think about what it is in your learning community that most poses a challenge, and begin to start connecting the dots. And hopefully these materials will help you do that. We'll also be having lots of conversation and time for you to have state planning in your teams, and you'll be getting individual support from me and other NAESP staff when you're here to help you really formulate your arguments and your elevator pitches before you go into these meetings. So as I was saying, look at these talking points when you receive your materials and think about what are the most pressing issues that you face as a principal. Now, I'm not talking about your kids in this question, or your teachers. I'm talking about you as a professional, because that's really where you can begin to think about the bigger implications. Because as we move forward with ESSA, it's going to be imperative that principals start building stronger relationships with their states and with their districts. The disposition of the law that is now ground up requires this. Secondly, please now also think about the issues facing your school and your community: poverty, mental health, healthcare, basic student well-being issues. Do you have an explosion of English language learners in your school? What's going on? What are the big challenge areas, and how can we start connecting the dots for you to really be able to articulate the importance of some of these federal programs that help you meet these student learning needs? So again, here are some guiding questions that you'll be receiving. It'd be great for you to start, writing out what these issues are. They will help you really get into the mindset for a meeting so that you can articulate your story. And this is what we mean when we say tell your story. This is how you articulate what the challenges you faced in your school community, how you can help staff and members of Congress understand what the role of a principal does, and faces each and every day. So you got to put a real face on it, not just talk numbers. But speaking of numbers, those help. So if you've got high percentages of poverty in your school, special needs, and et cetera, we know the challenges. Make sure you have a good handle on those numbers. Make sure you can come in and round out that story, that face, with the numbers that will show what it is that you're facing every day and what your kids are struggling with, and your teachers. And again, it's not just about what's not working or the challenges. If you're successful in your school and through your own instructional leadership and your collaboration with your community, talk about what is working, what has made a difference. If you have been a rock star, and I know many of you are, in increasing your student achievement, talk about how you did that. Was it a PBIS intervention? Because you know what? That got a great amount of language and mention in ESSA. So we need to show how this new law is really going to help support principals address these varied and myriad learning conditions that are needed for kids to be successful. So just, again, the nuts and bolts, odds and ends, wear comfortable shoes. You guys are going to be running around the Hill, sometimes from one side of the Capitol to the other. Make sure you're ready to go. March is kind of a strange time in Washington for weather. For example, yesterday we had 65 degrees, and tonight it's going to snow. So be prepared. Bring a coat if you need it. You may just need a sweater. It's hard to tell what you'll have the day of. But again, be prepared to stand in the line. We'll be in session. Make sure that you're scheduling your meetings and allowing enough time in between meetings to get from one building to another. If you need help scheduling these meetings, again, please let me know. So that's it. That's our quick run through for our preparation. If you have a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat box. Question box. And I'm going to give it 30 seconds to see if anybody has any burning questions. You have one. So you guys are all pros, ready to go. Glad to hear it. So as I promised, We wanted to be most efficient with the time this afternoon. In our poll, we did note that many of you have not really gotten a full rundown on Title IV. So I'll just quickly end on that note because it's really a positive improvement in ESEA, and one which I think you'll be happy to hear about. So the one area we didn't do a Tabata version in ESSA on is related to the new Title IV Part A block grants. And what Congress did is they took a lot of the categorical programs that relate to well-rounded programs like Safe and Healthy Students and combined it into a block grant. So again, the block grant is reflective of the fact that ESSA was a bipartisan bill. So while Republicans wanted to slash programs and combine funding streams, Democrats were really fighting for those unique categorical smaller programs, but those programs that really made a difference in the lives of children when their schools were implementing comprehensive services. So everybody won. What happened was they took all of those programs, which really encompass school counselors, after school, arts integration, music, and extended learning time, and put it into a $1.6 billion block grant. This issue is actually starting to percolate in a budget context because Congress, it's uncertain whether or not Congress will provide the full $1.65 billion in order to implement this enormous block grant. And complicating that matter is the administration's budget request, which came out about 2 weeks ago, actually almost a month ago. It's March now. So the budget request, the president and the administration only requested $500 million for this new section of the law, which was really disheartening. What that means also is they proposed, instead of issuing these grants by formula, which I think was a key piece that I failed to mention, these funds that would be administered in a block grant would also be allocated to states by formula, and that's by poverty and population. But the administration is proposing to knock it down to $500 million and then only allow the grants to go out by competition, which we don't support. So that's going to be a piece of the budget talking points that you'll have plenty of information to review and then comment on. So a couple of other questions are coming in that I just want to address real fast. One question is about the states and opting out. So the law requires, actually doesn't require, but allows states to consider as part of their accountability index whether or not they want to include 95% participation rates. So states also have an option whether or not they want to calculate it in one of two ways. You can calculate your 95% participation rate in terms of total population of students who are assessed, or you can calculate it by subgroup, 95% of a certain subgroup that was assessed. So I'm bringing this up in the context of it's a state option because the law only specifically requires states to provide an assurance. It is silent on opt-out. It gives states the option as to whether or not they want to include the participation rate as part of the index. Now, the index indicators that are prescribed in the quote-unquote guardrails in the new accountability system are really meant to be a floor, not a ceiling. So states can add really whatever factors and indicators they want to in order to determine their differentiated system, which of course is where schools are identified for improvement against that differentiation. And on that point, school improvement is triggered for the schools that fall within the bottom 5% within the differentiation system. So another question, it's really going to be up to this, again, just final point on opt-out, because I have a couple of questions about that. This would be an interesting conversation when you guys come to town about what's going on. I'm really looking forward to hearing. But, you know, opt-out is not addressed in the law. That was a political hot potato. There really it's really going to be up to the states and the districts to work with you guys to determine what kinds of procedures, parental notification, other processes are going to be included as part of ESSA implementation. So I encourage you to really think about this. These are the issues where principals need to weigh in. Another question, is ESSA expected to increase the number of charters? Yes. There's significant expansion opportunities for states and districts under ESSA. That was an entire new section of the law. It's really meant to help states increase their caps in the numbers of charters that are allowed to run as public charters in states and districts. And in fact, just a note on that, the definition of school leader does include a local education agency only as it relates to the fact that many charters are designated as their own LEAs. So whoever the head of that charter is, the public charter, can also benefit from the professional development opportunities and outcomes that are a use of funds under Title I and Title II. So last chance, otherwise we can end early and give you the rest of your lunch hour or your morning back. And it looks like folks must be feeling a little bit more prepared. Again, please note that you'll be getting a copy of this webinar, the audio, the slides, as well as a whole host of additional background and preparatory materials by tomorrow afternoon. And as always, please feel free to email me any questions. You can also call me. My cell phone and direct line are always on my signature block in my email. So with that, I really look forward to seeing all of you, look forward to meeting those of you who will be joining us for the first time. And as always, pleased to be supporting the role of principals here in Washington. So take care, and we'll see you in a few short days.